Welcome back to this playthrough, this retrospective slash review for Batman Arkham Knight. And I just want to go ahead and just kind of collect some of my thoughts on the game. And, I'll just jump right into it. Well, first of all, I'll go back to the way I was playing Asylum and Arkham City and then this one. One of the things I did was I read the prequel comics before playing the video game. And that was a really interesting way of playing this entire trilogy of games. And if you somehow have avoided being spoiled by who the Arkham Knight is, I do want to point out that you probably don't want to read the prequel comics. But if you're like many of us who basically weren't even trying to look into Arkham Knight, but still had the surprise spoiled, then basically you can go ahead and read the prequel comics. But basically, the prequel comics don't even try to hide who his identity is. So you know going into the game who the Arkham Knight is for sure. And so that's kind of a big detriment to reading them if you're trying to avoid that spoiler. But most of us aren't. So take that as it will. So that's a minor aspect of the prequel comics that could be somewhat annoying, but I don't think it's that big of an annoyance. Now, what I think is a big annoyance is how they fundamentally changed some of the characters in the Batman series. And probably one of the biggest things is you might have heard me, if you watch any of my playthroughs for this, complaining about the Tim Drake, Barbara Gordon romance. And, well, I'm just not a big fan of that for multiple reasons. Basically, in the comics, everybody knows that Barbara Gordon and Dick Grayson have always pretty much had a thing for each other off and on for years. And in the comics, Barbara's quite a bit older than Tim Drake. So I think what they did in this series is they decided, hey, we're going to de-age Barbara Gordon, so age her down a little bit, and at the same time age up Tim Drake. So I'm not a big fan of that. It's a huge change to not only to the prequel comics, but even to certain aspects of this story that you saw that I'm just not a big fan of. The other thing about the prequel comics is the fact that there are certain characters that aren't in this game, and they do kind of detail what happened to them in the prequel comics, and they just kind of did some of them dirty. Did a lot of them dirty, to be honest with you. So there's that aspect. I don't think the prequel comics per se are bad, but I wouldn't exactly call them great either, or maybe even good. So they're just okay. So if you're going to do it that way, I mean, just keep that in mind. I think the prequel comics came around this game came out in 2015, so the prequel comics came out around the same time period. So you're dealing with DC at the New 52 level of writing, which was hit or miss, and it was pretty average, I guess, at this point here. I wouldn't call it bad, but I wouldn't call it great either. Before I get into the game itself, one thing I do want to talk about that I really wish I had more time to play the game this way was Linux performance. Now, I played all three of these games under Linux, and basically, I played with the standard Proton package from Steam for both Arkham Asylum and Arkham Knight, and I was using the Glorious Eggroll for Arkham City, and it's pretty amazing, really, the amount of stability difference between the standard Proton and Glorious Eggroll. So whereas Glorious Eggroll is kind of cool, and it'll let you enable a lot of functions and whatnot that you may not be able to get with standard Proton, it did introduce a rather large stability gap. I had frequent crashes with Arkham City, but that was something I can't say that I saw with Arkham Knight or Arkham Asylum. In fact, this game was under Linux, prior to my hardware issues, this game was extremely stable and 100% playable. Now, I don't have the latest and greatest when it comes to hardware. And in fact, I'm actually several generations old on both my CPU and my GPU. So I was kind of forced to put this at 30 frames per second. And, which is kind of interesting because, like, I play games like Doom 2016, for instance, and I play that with, like, all the details turned up and everything pretty much maxed out at 60 frames per second. But this game, admittedly, is known on the internet for not being the best optimized game. So even under Windows, I had to drop max frame rate down to 30 frames per second to get a good performing game. So that's not a knock on Linux performance. It's just the way the game is. And honestly, at 30 frames per second, the game does play well. So I wouldn't be leery of putting it on 30 frames per second because I think you will get a good play experience out of it at 30 frames per second, whether you play it under Windows or you play it under Linux. And I will say, even with that, the default Proton setup under Linux does have a lot of the NVIDIA effects enabled by default, which is something that you didn't see in the previous two versions of the Arkham game. So that is actually, it's a nice touch, to say the least. So if you're thinking about playing this on Linux, I would highly encourage you to do so with the standard Proton. You'll get a more stable game. You can try to put in the glorious egg roll version of Proton and get some of the more NVIDIA effects enabled if you have an NVIDIA card. If you're running this with AMD, I wouldn't even bother to do that. The only reason I would even consider it is if you have a really high-end NVIDIA card, and at that point, then maybe I would consider doing glorious egg roll. But keep in mind, you may be sacrificing some stability to get that out of the way. So now we've talked about the comics and the Linux performance. Let's talk about the actual game itself, and this goes for pretty much any platform you play it on. This game, it's definitely a trilogy game. And by that, I mean you can't really jump into it and really understand what's going on without having played the first two games. You may be able to get away with not playing Arkham Asylum first, but even that's really, no, I think you really need to play all three games to really understand what's going on here. And the game kind of expects you to. So do keep that in mind when you are thinking about playing this game, is you do need to play Asylum and Arkham City before you play this. Not only just to know what's going on from a story perspective, but even in this game, just to right off the bat, they kind of expect you already know how the controls of the game work and how the game basically functions. They kind of, I wouldn't say they throw you into the deep end, but they kind of do, really, from the word go. So keep that in mind for sure. Now, gameplay-wise, I think the game does control very well. All the Arkham games, I think they're very good from a gameplay perspective. I can't knock any of them on that front. I've enjoyed playing all three of the games. And when I say that, I don't want to besmirch Arkham Origins, but Arkham Origins was done by a different team, and the events of Arkham Origins predate this one by quite a bit. So it's still a good game, but it's not part of this trilogy. So I do want to point that out, that Rocksteady worked on all three of these games, and Warner Brothers Montreal worked on Arkham Origins. Having said that, this game did introduce, as you can tell right here, the Batmobile mechanic, which is something new to all three of the Arkham games. Now, The Batmobile portion of the game is actually not. Let's see, how can I word this? It's not the greatest, but at the end of the day, it's actually a pretty decent addition. I do enjoy playing the Batmobile segments. Unfortunately, they probably put too much emphasis on the Batmobile. There's just so many Riddler trophies and segments of the game that are highly dependent on the Batmobile. And so, like I said, I do like it. It's fun, a fun diversion, but at the same time, it's just focused on way too much. But you know, it's not bad. I would say it's a good addition, perhaps overdone a little bit. Um, Having said that, though, I mean, and the Batmobile truly does feel like you're driving around in a tank, um, which I guess was kind of the point. But other than that, the, one of the control aspects of the game that I do feel also does kind of come back to the whole Batmobile aspect is they changed the control scheme once again from Arkham City and Arkham Asylum, but they kind of did more of a drastic control change a little bit here to accommodate the uh, the extra functions of the Batmobile, and it's something you can get used to, but at the same time, it's probably one of the biggest um, disparities between the games. Now, there was a slight control change between Arkham Asylum and Arkham City, but it wasn't anything that was super detrimental. The way they changed, like the way you access gadgets and whatnot in this game, was pretty substantially different, and and that definitely took a lot more getting used to, especially after I spent so much time in both City and Asylum for them to change that much of the game. But I mean, the combat itself is still pretty much your typical good Arkham combat stuff. So if you enjoy the Arkham combat, which I don't know why you wouldn't, because it actually is pretty good, you're going to enjoy playing Arkham Knight as well. Now, once again, getting back to the trilogy aspect of this game, we got to look at the storyline. And the story does, it has some good improvements. It really does, but it also has a lot of drawbacks that I do want to talk about. Let's go ahead and start with the improvements for starters. First of all, I think that this game did something that Arkham City was kind of poor about. And this game integrated the side missions into the main storyline in a much better fashion. In fact, if I were to sit here and think about the way I played Arkham City and the way I played Arkham Knight, I would say I probably played both games wrong. Because at Arkham City, you really should focus mostly on the main quest and then come back to all the side missions. Whereas in Arkham Knight, it's very much designed where you focus on the side missions as you're doing the main storyline. And to be honest, I actually do really like that aspect of Arkham Knight. I think it's a great change and probably a good thing that they learned from their time doing Arkham City. So I think that was an excellent change to incorporate the side missions so heavily into the main storyline, or give you the option of doing the side missions in the main story during the main storyline. The main storyline did have, let's see, does it have a lot of twists and turns? Um, Kinda. Um, and another thing I guess I did like from this one, there weren't a lot of major characters that ended up dying in this game compared to Arkham City. Arkham City killed off quite a few characters, um, and this one there were some deaths in the game. Actually, maybe only really one if we're being completely honest. And it was a pretty major death, but it was done in a pretty good fashion, I would say. And probably, I would say from that aspect, they weren't in the Tim Burton mold of doing Batman games where they kill off the characters left and right. So I do appreciate that aspect of the game. Having said that, the story, there is a lot of problems with the story. For starters, the that one aspect of the game that I mentioned about basically spreading out the side missions over the entire course of the game, just like in Arkham City, it completely and totally ruins the believability of everything that's going on here. Get off this one. Because there's no way that you would have been able to do all this stuff in one evening. And that's probably one of my biggest criticisms of Arkham City is the fact that they wanted you to just kind of hit the I believe button that you could do all this in one night. It's an open world game that doesn't have a day-night cycle. It's all one evening. And that's once again going to be a big criticism of this game for me. That believability factor just isn't there. Another factor is the side missions. These are all the default side missions in the game. Some of them are actually pretty good. Some of them not so good. That's the main mission right there. Let's see if I can do this. There are aspects of these side missions that were also good, but also missed opportunities. So the identity of Arkham Knight, it was something that has been done better elsewhere in other Batman stories. And, with Joker being dead, the motivation for the Arkham Knight's character, and once again, I want to keep it vague in case you didn't watch my playthroughs and you have somehow avoided who the Arkham Knight is. His motivations in this game, without the Joker, with the Joker being dead, and that's not a big spoiler. I mean, if you're playing Arkham Knight, Joker died at the end of Arkham City. With Joker being dead, his motivations don't really make a lot of sense. They just don't. But there's a lot of characters in these side missions that were very much underutilized. This guy in particular, Deacon Blackfire, for everything that happened in Arkham Knight, if you've ever read the comic The Cult, which is where this character came from, obviously this is a different take on that character, he could have been such a bigger force in the game. And they just really put him as a side mission. And not even just a side mission, a very short side mission. Very easily done in like 15, 20 minutes, and you're done with his side mission. That's how quick he's there and gone. So I do appreciate the fact that they brought in a fairly obscure villain, but they could have done a lot better with that character. Another character that was kind of built up to, or you thought may be a good character, not Lucius. Lucius is actually pretty well represented, was Hush. They kind of built all this stuff up to Hush. In fact, Hush could have very well filled the role of Arkham Knight, obviously in a different type of manner, but they could have done so much more with the character of Hush. So I feel like Deacon Blackfire and Hush, both their character arcs and the side missions were neat to a certain extent, but they're also severely underutilized. And that was an aspect I wasn't a big fan of. That's just the overall. This one, The Perfect Crime with Professor Pig, that was a very well done side mission. I liked it. It was very good. Two-Face, Penguin, their side missions, actually pretty well done. I liked both of those very well. Deathstroke being in this game, it was a great addition, and having him tied into being the militia commander after Arkham Knight, was off the scene. It's good that they brought Deathstroke in that way, but I felt all three of the militia missions were just busy work. And busy work just to be busy work, and they're just kind of like padding for the game, for lack of better words. And after a while, you're just like, come on, man. How many more of these checkpoints, watchtowers, mines? What do I have to do? It felt like busy work for busy work's sake. And I wasn't a big fan of that. That's what the Riddler stuff is. Riddler trophies and all that stuff, they're just busy work. So you already had padding with the Riddler focused stuff, and then you added on those missions as well. So it's like padding up on padding. And I mean, after 3 games of dealing with the Riddler, it was like, man, I'm tired of you too. So Riddler's kind of overdone in this game. You're like, I'm just done with you, man. Just go away already. I did like Firefly being in the game, and I thought his side mission was actually pretty interesting. I did like his. A very good side mission. Kirk Langstrom, another very interesting side mission, and well done. So, like I said, mixed bag. Some of the missions were very good. Some felt like busy work. The firefighters could go either way. I kind of liked it. It wasn't quite to the same level as the militia stuff, so I'll kind of give that a neutral rating. I thought the firefighter mission is pretty good. This is, once again, more militia filler. So there's basically 4 militia side missions that just feel like filler. Azrael's mission, pretty decent. I don't have too much to complain about there. So side missions are a bit of a mixed bag. A lot of them felt like filler, and there's just a lot of time just sitting there. You're doing these filler missions so that you can get the good ending of the game. And that was an aspect of Arkham Asylum and Arkham City that was not there. The ending of the game was the ending of the game. And I don't like the fact that for you to get the ending, the true ending, you had to go through all these side missions to get the true ending of the game. So that was something I'm not really a big fan of. And I'll go ahead, probably my biggest fault with this game is, once again, such a huge reliance on the Joker. Now, I know a lot of people love the Joker as a character. They think he's, a great villain and whatnot, and he is. But, for them to, once again, this guy's dead. He's dead. He's been out of the picture for months, and they still somehow shoehorn the Joker as one of the main antagonists of this video game. It's just like, couldn't you just have let his story end in Arkham City? Why did Joker have to be such a big aspect of this story? And it wasn't done in a good, or even, I obviously it's a comic book thing, so believability is always one of those things that you're going to kind of have to take with a grain of salt. But it just, they could have left Joker out, and they could have given more characters better fleshed out stories. Characters like Deacon Blackfire, like Hush, that were shunted off to the side so that Mark Hamill could get some more screen time as Joker. Joker's been done to death. And by the time you're here in this game, you're like, he should have just been, put to the side. Your story completed in Arkham City. You were done. But no, they had to shoehorn Joker into this game. And that's probably the biggest aspect of the game that I really didn't like. I thought they did a phenomenal job with Scarecrow as a villain. But yet you had to force Joker in this. It's like, why couldn't you let Scarecrow have more of the limelight? Why did you have to share so much of the spotlight with the Joker? But yeah, I think they did a great job with Scarecrow as a villain. He was very well utilized, kind of like the way Hugo Strange was in Arkham City. I thought they did a great job with both those guys as characters, as being the main antagonist. But unfortunately, you have this Joker aspect stealing some of their spotlight. In fact, in this case, stealing most of their spotlight, actually, which is, in this game, I should say, which just kind of really stinks. Um, that's pretty much most of what I can think about when it comes to the story aspects of the game. There is one thing I think I would like to talk about, and that is the DLC. There's a large amount of DLC for this game, and it's kind of a mixed bag, to be completely honest with you. Um, if you're thinking about getting any of the DLC and think about the season pass, I really would recommend only getting it when it's on sale. So this aspect of the side mission screen right here is the Season of Infamy. And this is probably one of the better aspects of the DLC for the game. So I thought the two side missions here with Mad Hatter and Killer Croc were actually pretty good. I actually liked them. They were very good missions. This one with the League of Assassins and Ra's al Ghul, I wasn't a big fan of, not because of the writing. It was just very poorly lit, very hard to see, literally just see in the game. And that actually really hurt this particular side mission. In from the Cold was actually a very well done side mission. So, Season of Infamy, that aspect of the DLC is probably one of the best DLCs in the game. Each one of these missions is relatively short, about 30 minutes or so each. So, you're only talking about 2 hours of playtime. But the fact that they are well integrated into the main story, and they're good. Like I said, In from the Cold is probably one of the better stories in the game. So they did just an amazing job, really pulling at your heartstrings there at the end, kind of thing too. And it was just a very well done story. And so I would definitely highly recommend, if you only get one DLC package, Season of Infamy is probably it. That would be the one I would recommend above all others. The other ones, story related ones, like the Red Hood one and the Nightwing, those are huge disappointments. I got done with those, and both of those in less than 20 minutes. They were not very good. The Catwoman one, I spent a little bit more time, but mostly because they just had a pretty frustrating final fight, basically. So I wouldn't say that one was well done either. Um, the one with Robin, A Flip of the Coin, was probably a little bit better, but just marginally so. And it was also very short. So of the Arkham episodes, and then Harley Quinn's, hers was pretty decent as well, but once again, pretty short. All of the Arkham episodes, DLCs, most of them were short. The only one that wasn't was A Matter of Family, and it was a pretty interesting DLC, getting to play as Batgirl and Robin. Once again, though, there's that whole weird Barbara Gordon, Tim Drake romance thing going on, which is kind of like a reverse of what they did in A Killing Joke, the animated version of A Killing Joke. If you've watched that, you know the beginning of A Killing Joke. It's pretty controversial amongst fans. So, I'm still not a big fan of that aspect of this whole game, that they decided to introduce that here, which wasn't even hinted at in the first two games. But playing as both those characters in A Matter of Family was pretty decent, and it was a little more expansive of an area, so it was pretty good. But guess what? Once again, who's the main focus of everything? The Joker. Always the Joker. So for that aspect, I would say That DLC is probably the second best of the DLCs available, but it's not as good as Season of Infamy. Season of Infamy is by far the best. Matter Family is pretty decent, but it doesn't fit in chronologically with any of the Arkham games because it happens after Origins and it happens before Arkham Asylum. So chronologically, it's kind of like in its own limbo land, as it were. Um, so yeah, DLC wise, the DLC is a bit of a mixed bag. There is some good stuff, but there's a lot of padding in the DLC too, though. There's a whole bunch of Batmobile ones that I got with the season pass. There's a bunch of these AR challenge editions with all the different sidekicks. So like you can do all the AR challenges with people like Harley Quinn, Nightwing, Robin, Batgirl, even Azrael and Red Hood. So I don't know the season pass. I don't regret getting it because I'm pretty sure I paid for it when it was on sale. I don't think I would pay full price for it, and that's just something I think you should definitely keep in mind for sure. Um, Overall, I did like Arkham Knight as a tie up to the trilogy, though. It had its high points and it also had a lot of low points. And in fact, the true ending of the game is just too ambiguous as well. So the ending of the game is extremely ambiguous, and it's like, hey, let's have a debate over what you think the ending of the game is. No, I'd much rather the trilogy be tied up and not be ambiguous. I mean, we can all have our debates over what you think the ending of the game means, and I definitely have my thoughts on it. But I don't know. It almost didn't feel the ending wasn't satisfying. Whereas the ending to Arkham City, I actually liked the ending. I thought it was well both Arkham Asylum and Arkham City really. The endings were good. So I think they dropped the ball in a lot of areas here. The ending in particular, for sure. It's funny. I crash everybody else's cars, but not the cop cars. They don't blow up. Moving on. So the uh, the story is probably one of the bigger disappointments of the game. There were definitely some good aspects of it, but there was a lot of aspects that were just kind of disappointing, especially when you consider the fact that this is supposed to be how we wrap up the trilogy and in the whole Batman portion of the Arkham universe. So from that perspective, it's a mixed bag. It truly is. But at the end of the day, I do think it's a good game. And if you've played Arkham Asylum, Arkham City, you do owe it to yourself to play through Arkham Knight just to see how the story ends. It's not the greatest of endings. They do some good things. Like I said, Scarecrow, I think they did a great job with Scarecrow. He was a phenomenal villain. They actually did a pretty decent job with Arkham Knight, even though motivation wise, I don't think it was handled as well. Some of the side missions were actually really good. Uh, DLC wise, Season of Infamy, those tied in great with the story. Definitely worth playing that. Um, Overall, I don't know. I think I'd give this game probably about an 85%, maybe 90%. I'll say 90%. I'll give it a 90% because it still does have that fun gameplay aspect. The Batmobile, whereas it can be clunky and it feels like you're driving a tank because you are, it is an interesting addition to the game. A bit overdone, but it is a good addition. Um, the gameplay is still fun. It's at the end of the day, the gameplay is still great. It's still that Arkham style gameplay that was just perfected over all the games, and it's definitely worth playing for that alone. Like I said, the story, there are really good high points to it, but there's also some pretty big low points to it as well. So anyway, there you go. That's my final score. I'll say 90%. It's a good game, definitely worth playing. And if you play through Arkham City and Arkham Asylum, definitely pick it up and give it a try. And if you're thinking about playing this on the Steam Deck or on Linux, 100% give it a go because it works great. It works stable with the default Proton, and in this one you even get a lot of the NVIDIA physics effects enabled if you have an NVIDIA card. So there you go. That's my thoughts. So thank you very much for watching this video, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care.